We left off on page 310, and we were speaking about the idea that that Mitzrayim, that the Yidden going out of Mitzrayim is because there's the level Mitzrayim is Meitzar Hagoren. Meitzar Hagoren is the narrowness, the confines, the straits between the brain and the heart. In general, we spoke about that there is the Yudke Vavke within each and every one of us, which is the separation or the two levels of intellect and emotion, Seichel and Midas, or further, there's a level of Koiches Makifim, Koiches Pnimium, the transcendent and encompassing soul powers and the soul powers that permeate us. And we started saying that in general, the Koiches Pnimium is the level of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and that begins with Bina, because a person could say by Bina that they possess it, they own it, whereas Chochmah is considered from the Koiches Makifim because they don't own it, they don't take it in, they're not balabatim over it. The Chochmah and the Havraka and the Barak HaMavrik and the Kudus HaChochmah can come on its own without the person's preparation for it and so on. So once we explained the idea of Bina, now he explains the level which is associated with Neshama, as it says in Nishma Shindal Yud Tevinem. So we see that Bina has to do with Shindal, with Neshama. So now we're going to go on to the level of Ruach, which is the Midas. Let's start, even though we read this line, or two lines, let's start from the line that begins, Nishma Shindal Yud Tevinem. Like, I don't know, 8 lines into or something into the second paragraph on the page. So he's saying Vihine, Bina Nimshchla Midas, from Bina, it comes down into the Midas. Because how are the Midas born? How are they created? They're created from intellect. The level of Midas, that is the level of Ruach. And Ruach is located in the heart. Even Shebechinas Ruach. Since the Ruach is a part of the Neshama itself, therefore there is in the Midas, there's not only the Midas that are born from intellect, like we said before, that Bina gives birth to the level of Midas, the level of Ruach, but that is the expansion of the level of intellect that spreads out to the Midas. But also it has the level of the Midas of the heart from them, their own. In other words, like this, there's 2 levels of Midas that he's going to talk about. One is a level of Midas that are totally and completely created via the Moich. This is called, a lot of times the Chassidus and the Tanya use the term Ava v'yira sichlim, the chilu v'rechimu sichlim, that they are intellectual midas, meaning that they are created from the person's meditation and understanding about godliness. That is in contrast to what he starts introducing in Perik Yud Ches and Tanya, that there is the chilu v'rechimu tivium, Ava v'yira tivium, innate love and awe of Hashem. It's not based on my intellectual understanding. It's based on the essential connection that a Yid has with Hashem. So this second level of Midas are Midas of the heart itself. It's not an extension and expansion of the intellect. It's not a result of the intellect. But rather, Shehema Midas Hativim HaMesutarim, these are the innate natural Midas that are concealed. That's why it's called Ava Mesuteres. It's innate, it's concealed within us, it's part of our very makeup. True, one needs to use intellect when it comes to the chilu v'rechimu tivim, to the natural love and awe of Hashem. But the intellect is not something that creates this love and awe out of whole cloth, but it only reveals the innate love that is there already. They are a separate entity, totally removed and separate than the intellect, not like intellectually based emotions created by intellect. So then they're not independent of intellect, they are created by it, and they are an expansion, an extension of it. Rather, the true idea of emotions that is the level of ruach and the level of heart is those that are not an extension of the mind, not an extension of the neshama, but true ruach, true heart. It's completely there, independent of the intellect. Then the Rebbe goes on, just like he said, after bina, you have the level of midas. After neshama, you have the level of ruach. So now we go down to the level lower than that. The heart, it comes down to all the 248 limbs and organs. The heart spreads out to all sides until it comes down into action. Even to a level of action, the lowest form of action that needs to impact our emotions, even the way an action is by an animal. For example, says in the Gemara and Baba Kama speaks about that if an animal damaged something because when it walked, it kicked up pebbles, and the pebbles, let's say, hit something and broke it. So that is the lowest form of Maisa. It's not even something that the animal like had a conscious, to whatever degree you could say consciousness by an animal, purpose or goal in doing this. It just happened. Even in comparison in regards to an animal's mind or consciousness, it's called Maisa. These are two levels in action. The Rebbe says the fact that there's two levels in action corresponds to the same thing that we said that in Midas there's two levels. Similar to the two levels of emotions, there's a level of the emotions that we said is an expansion of the intellect because they're intellectually based and created by the intellect, versus a midas mitzadatzim canal opposed to the midas on their own, like we said before. So just like in midas, there's two levels of midas. Midas that are created by the intellect, and midas that are holy heart, holy midas. So therefore, there's the same thing in action, or in a similar vein, there's the same thing in action, not therefore, in a similar vein. A level of action that results from intellect, from mindfulness, from consciousness. And then and the level of action on its own. So the Rebbe says, even when you're dealing with this lowest form of action, even this lowest form of action, we need to bring intellect to bear. Also in the level of the lower level of action, those actions that we do in an unthinking manner, those actions that we do without a conscious thought and focus should also be done based on intellect. Just give a very simple example. You don't need to think about eating. You don't need to think about sleeping. You don't need to think about many types of natural things. But so we could do it like we're a robot. We could do it without thinking. He grabs to eat, he goes to sleep, whatever. Chassidus wants that even these type of actions need to be in such a type of way where I think there's a new type of expression lately, mindfulness, that a person needs to use their intellect, that I'm focused, I'm doing this purposefully, I'm doing this with regards to my connection with the Eibishter. So he says, close in the general idea of action, that's the level of nefesh. So now the Rebbe enumerated the lower half of the person, if you will, the part of the person that's nefesh, ruach, neshama, the level of bina, the level of emotions, and the level of action. Now he's going to go to the koiches makifim. Says all of this is the inner soul levels, the levels of the soul that permeate the person. In addition to this, there's also the transcendent levels. What are these transcendent levels? The transcendent levels, top of 311, begins with the idea of chokhmah, which we said before is that flash, that initial type of light bulb going up in our mind with an idea. Canal, like we said earlier, why it's considered makif. Shein Balabayas said he doesn't own it. He's not in control of it. It falls into his mind without his without necessarily the person preparing themselves for it. Therefore, it's not considered an internal soul power, because an internal soul power is something that I own, but rather it's a transcendent soul power. So in makif the chaya, that's the makif of the level of chaya. Amna makif zehu makif akarev. This makif, this transcendent level, even though we're calling it makif, it's a close makif. Close makif, we've spoken about this on other occasions, is like, for example, the makif of a garment. The garment surrounds us, but it's more or less tailored to our size. You can look at the garment and see how big we are and so on. And the same thing, the chachma is considered a close makif. Why? Moving gamazel, like it's also understood from the fact shel acher sheyesh nahabraka. Once that flash enters our mind, adehu balabayis also. Now he can own it. Now he could take that flash and grab hold of it and insert it into Bina and develop it and create something out of it. But in addition to the level of makif akarev, which is the level of chokor, there's a true level of makif. It's called makif harochik, the distant makif. It's the level of will that totally transcends intellect. Not a will that's derived from intellect. A rotzen that is beyond intellect. In other words, whenever Chassidus speaks about will, unless it says otherwise, it's talking about pure will. Pure will means there is no intellectual reason that causes him to want this. If a person sits down and thinks that A, B, and C is good for me, and therefore he wants it, so then that is a will that's based on intellect. And intellect can always manipulate it, and intellect changes, and therefore the will changes. So today he understands that ABC is good for him, so he's going to want that. Tomorrow he's going to become smarter. He's going to realize that XYZ is better than ABC, or ABC is even bad for him. He's going to want that. That's not true will. That's intellect playing around with it. But true will is a will that comes from a place that's beyond intellect. And not only does it come from a place that's beyond the intellect, but it's so much more powerful than intellect, umata oisai. And it forces and bends the intellect to its will. Normally we would think, like we said before, today I understand this, so now I want this. Tomorrow I understand something else, so now I want something else. But the idea of will, as it is in its pure state, is just the opposite. The will causes that today the intellect will understand one thing, and tomorrow the intellect will understand something else. That level, the level of the makif, the level of the will that's beyond our intellect. In other words, it's not created by anything that we do. That will and desire that we have for Hashem, that is a gift from above. That's called an avoida, a gift service I will give your kohen. Like it's brought down Tanya Shal Achra avoida b'koiches pnimiyim, after working with the internal soul powers. Shemagaz adoil mabri avad b'chlal, that the internal soul powers, the levels of the different levels of Ava that we just now said. For example, we said nefesh, which is has to do with Maisus, so that's primarily has to do with the world of Asiya. Ava v'yira tivim, Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, causes that the mitzvahs go up to the world of Yitzira. Ava v'yira sichlim, causes that the mitzvahs should go up to the level of Bria. So after one masters those, after one goes through all those different levels of avodah, they're dealing with the nefesh and the ruach and the neshama. So then, yesh bechinas avodas matana. There's an avodah that's a gift service. In other words, this is a service that the person didn't work on, but it's a service that's given as a gift from above. that's so much higher. The drawing down of the level of Makif. Any questions?
Well, some of these things were simply born with, or were they result from different things in childhood, or where they come
Everything
from?
they're saying over here is a matter of work. Even Ratzon, which is a gift that comes to us. It's like a bonus once we've done the work that we're supposed to do. But everything over here, action is something that the person works on. Emotions are something that the person at least tries to evoke, and level of intellect is also, all these things are things that a person needs to work on and awaken within themselves. And even Ratzon, which he says is a gift from above, or it's a gift from above, like he said, once we've done the avoided with the koiches premium, once I invested my mice, I did what I'm supposed to do. I invested my emotions. I even invested my makif harochik, the level of chachma, in my connection to Hashem. So then Hashem gifts us the level of the Ratzon. Second paragraph on page 311. Kadesh Yuchalis in Nabchira, so that they should be able to be the idea of free choice. This, in opposition to that, Hashem made. As has been is just like there's the 10 soul powers that we just now enumerated. In the Nefshalakis, in the godly soul, so too the Nefshabahamis has the 10 crowns of Tumah. But even though they're seemingly the same, 10 and 10, it's intellects, emotions, and Makifim, premium, but the direction they're going in is completely different. In the godly soul, they are about going upwards. They're about rising and trying to reach upwards. The spirit of a person rises above. On the animal soul, they're in a movement of descent. The spirit of the animal is descending below. That's where the Nefesh Bahamis is pulling and directing itself in these 10 soul powers. So he explains the Nefesh Bahamis has the inner soul powers that we said before, the soul powers that permeate it. That's the intellect of Nefesh Bahamis and the emotions of Nefesh Bahamis and the actions of Nefesh Bahamis. And not only does it have the koiches premium, it also has the transcendent soul powers. What does that mean? What did we say before? Ratzon is independent of Seichel. So just like in the godly soul, there's the level of Ratzon that's independent of Seichel, and it can even turn Seichel around to different things that it wants, the same thing. It could be that Nefesh Bahamis, Shazel Mashiach Lasses Davar, Neged HaSeichel, that the Nefesh Bahamis can do something that is against intellect. Why is that? Because the Ratzon of Shabamis is so strong that it can override and veto the intellect. The truth is, we don't have to, look very far. Just looking at the headlines and looking at politicians and looking at all the scandals, and people just think to themselves, what were they thinking? Years and years of scandals, politicians that are caught in the most compromising positions, and you think to yourself, what were they thinking? Did they really think they could go on doing this and nobody would touch them? But it wasn't logical. I once even remember hearing an interview with one of them that, the mind just went flying out the window. No, you don't think, you stop thinking. They say, up till can even have a very powerful and strong will, to do something that's completely the opposite of seichel. The Rebbe says not just the seichel of kedusha, but even seichel, what the world would be considered seichel, is something completely opposite. When I was in yeshiva, I remember Makifim used to tell over a story with Aristo. Aristo is the Lashon Kodesh name for Aristotle. Aristotle was a big brain, a big mind, or whatever. At one time, his students saw him doing something completely beneath his stature or whatever, and so on. Totally unlike what you would expect of such a great intellect. So he answered, the Mashpim used to say, now I'm not Aristotle. In other words, now while I'm doing this, I'm not Aristotle. I'm not that big brain that you know, etc. The Rebbe says this level of the Ratzon and Nefesh Bahamas that can totally override and do something that's completely beyond and against intellect. So in Klippas Amalek, that is the clip of Amalek. So Haratzon Shalai Seichel, that's the will that's completely not in accordance with intellect, which it's brought down the lashon for it in Chazal, chutzpah b'loy taga, a chutzpah without a crown. In other words, like this: there are those that have a crown because they are a king. In other words, they've earned the right to have chutzpah. They've earned the right to be haughty and above because they've been appointed a king and so on and so forth. Amalek has the chutzpah of itself without the level of a crown, without any reason, in other words. It's a ratzon, it's a will to go against Hashem without any understanding, without any sense to it. To be able to be victorious in the war against Amalek, there's a need to be empowered by a very high level. Since the level that Amalek represents is the level of Makif, to be able to counter Makif, which Makif is a very strong and powerful level, practically speaking, if a person's will is going against intellect, you can't change them by speaking to them with intellect. If a person had, let's say, certain desires that made sense to him, so then you can have a conversation with him, you can have a dialogue, you can have a debate, you can convince the person that intellectually what his choices are bad choices, and therefore he needs to change them. But if l'melchatchila, the whole choice is not coming because of anything having to do with intellect, his whole will is something that is against intellect. If so, you need to bring other forces to bear to be able to defeat that. So, Indian, that's the idea. She's from the stock and clap and Milo that we spoke about at the beginning of the Maimer. Why is it specifically over here that Moshe Rabbeinu had to raise his hands and the Yidden looked upwards, whereas in other wars, you didn't need to have that emphasis about the raising of the hands. No other time did Moshe Rabbeinu do it. No other time, no other war was done that they had to look upwards, because no other time did they have to deal with such a type of klippa of rotzen that's higher than reason. Mevur begers tshuva, okay, mevur begers tshuva, like explaining the begers tshuva, shetzodich la'oira rachnim hal yoinim. Person needs to awaken and arouse the supernal compassion and mercy al bechinas al kusher v'nafsha, and the godliness of his soul. And not only does he have to have rachmanis about the godliness of his soul, but since everything that a yid does down here impacts above, and because we say Hashem Tzilcha, Hashem is our shadow, so whatever movements we make, it impacts above. So if Chas v'Sholem, we do not do something the way it's supposed to be, so then it's not just us and our nefesh elokis and the godliness that's in our soul that is affected by it negatively, but also the Shechina, which is the source of Klal Yisrael and the Knesset Yisrael, also is being drawn down into the most disgusting place. That they're in a state of Golus. So the Yid has to awaken compassion and mercy both on the godliness that's in his soul and also on the Shekhinah above that's being schlepped down through his inappropriate activities. Where does he draw it down from? He needs to draw it down from the 13 attributes of mercy. That's totally beyond Seder Ishtalshlus, because to be able to defeat the Makif, you need to draw down from the Makif. Then Nemar, concerning this, it says, when Moshe will raise his hand, then the Jewish people would overpower. That the power for this comes by the Haramas Yadish al Moshe. It comes specifically through Moshe Rabbeinu's raising his hand. It's not just the idea of Mistaklin Klapa Maila. That itself has to be evoked through Moshe Rabbeinu. The idea behind this is Moshe is from the 7 shepherds. That there's throughout the history of Klal Yisrael, it says there's 7 shepherds and 8 princes, and essentially different leaders of Klal Yisrael are called the shepherds. But amongst the seven shepherds, Moshe Rabbeinu is called the shepherd par excellence. He is the most special shepherd. He is the unique and special shepherd. Is called the faithful shepherd. To such a degree is he our shepherd that he is invested in us to direct us within. There's the Moshe within every single yid. And the famous thing, we had this recently, what does Hashem ask of you? Only to fear him. That the level of fear and awe of Hashem is a minor thing. For whom? For the Moshe. Which Moshe? Within every single yid, like it's explained in Tanya. Only specifically through the level of Moshe, that the level of Moshe is always whole and complete in a yid that can never be damaged or affected. Top of the next page, that should come down below the level that's beyond. So in other words, we need to look upwards, but then Moshe Rabbeinu is actually drawing that down, and the Moshe within us is drawing down that level that's higher than Ishtalshlus. Through that level of being that's being drawn down from the 13 attributes of mercy, it's higher than say the Ishtalshlus. Then there could be the victory in the war against Amalek. But there has to be actually not just Moshe himself, but there has to be the raising of the hands of Moshe. For this, there has to be that Moshe raises his hand. It's similar to what it says, raise up your hands, holiness. What does this mean? Through raising your hands, we reach to a level that's even higher than Shem Havaya, till it can be that you will bless Havaya. In other words, we know that when you give a bracha, you're drawing down. Let's say if I give someone a bracha, I'm trying to, or a Rebbe gives someone a bracha, he's drawing down from a level that's higher than the person. Like brachas in the word vayavrech, it's like malim. He's drawing down on that person levels from above. When we say in this pasuk, suyidechem kodesh ubarach was Havaya, to bench Havaya, we're giving Havaya a bracha. That means we're drawing down from a level that's higher than Shem Yud Kevavke. We said Shem Yud Kevavke, that's the level of the Seichel and Midas we said earlier in the Maimer, or it's the Koiches Makifim, Koiches Pnimim. We have to draw down from a level higher and then impact and bring it down into Baruch Havayim. And that is done through the raising of the hands. So it's concerning Moshe raising his hands. Through that we reach higher than the four letters of Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. The similarity or the corresponding level concerning what it says that Moshe of his soul raises his hand. What does it mean that Moshe, which in each and every one of us would raise his hands? It's about touching and reaching the level that's beyond the 10 internalized soul powers. Through that, it's possible to defeat Amalek. Like we know, Amalek is the level of being cold and ambivalent. To such a degree that the defeat of Amalek becomes a preface and introduction to Matan Torah. Like it says by Yisroi, that Yisroi heard. We had this also in the previous Maimer. What did Yisroi hear that caused them to come? So he says, Kriyas Yamsuf, he heard about the splitting of the sea. Amalek, he heard about the war against Amalek. This means through the war of Amalek, we come to Yisroi saying Baruch Hashem. Asher Hitzlaschem, he thanked the Eibishter for saving the Yidden. Mavur Bezoyer, explain the Zoyer, Shazel Win Dias Narmatach Achoisha. That Yisroi, so the word addition. The fact that someone who came from a background of Avodah Zarah, that there was every Avodah Zarah in the world he had served, and now he thanked and recognized Hashem, that's the additional light that comes out of darkness. And that was a necessary prerequisite before there could be Matan Torah. Only through this we reach Matan Torah. So that means the feeling Amalek brings to Yisrael, brings to Matan Torah. So that means the defeat of Amalek leads to Matan Torah. Let's conclude. Remember, this is what Amalek did to you. The intention of remembering is that it should be the erasing of Amalek. Who the order in this is. Initially, there's the idea that I will erase. That Hashem Kaviyachal says, I will erase Amalek. What does that mean? Who is the I in taking the place of Hashem? Each one of us has the godliness in our neshama that defeats Amalek. That's the I will erase that Hashem says. Afterwards becomes also the fulfillment that it says later on that you shall eradicate Amalek. So in Parshat B'Shalach it says Hashem does it. And afterwards we do it. How is that? When we do it by the powers of the inner soul powers. There's the above powers, the levels of the koiches, Makifim, and then there's a level from me, Timcha. It's coming from my own being, Shazel on Tzachon, I avoid because I mean that's this victory through the avoid with the inner soul power. Until we reach the idea that Hashem's Muhammad and Amalek is generation to generation. Like the Targum translates and explains, the Koy Gamal Dora, the Mashiach. It's also referring to the generation of Mashiach. Then we fulfill the promise that he will put an end to darkness and be Mashiach the coming of Mashiach speedily.